President Obama goes before Congress and the nation to say the country has unfinished work to do on the economy and reviving the middle class. Those will be central themes in the State of the Union address that lays out the policies for his second term. It all will happen moments from now. Welcome to the Wall Street Journal's live coverage of the State of the Union. I'm Jerry Seib. And while the economy is expected to dominate the president's speech, some big questions remain on other matters, whether he'll have the political capital to push through his proposals to overhaul immigration, to combat gun violence, and to address climate change. We've got an all-star lineup to weigh in with in-depth analysis on all that, including former Obama senior advisor David Axelrod, former New York Governor George Pataki, Republican National Chairman Reince Priebus, as well as San Antonio Mayor and Democratic rising star Julian Castro. Be sure to join the conversation by tweeting us at #WSJLive. So joining me now to kick this off is the man often called the architect of the Obama political rise, University of Chicago Institute of Politics Director David Axelrod, who's with us from Chicago. David, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Jerry.
So, David, you have the advantage on the rest of us tonight. You actually have some idea of what's going to be in this speech. So share with us a little bit. What do you expect to see? What are the president's goals tonight? What are the policies he most wants to push?
You know, I honestly don't think there's a lot of mystery about the speech tonight, Jerry, because the president ran on the themes that he will talk about tonight. I think the centerpiece of it is how you restore the economy in such a way that the middle class is growing and not shrinking, and people who work hard can get ahead. And he believes that there are things that we need to do to make that happen. Obviously, he's going to talk about some of the other issues as well, climate change and immigration reform, gun safety. But fundamentally, the challenge we face as a country, the principal challenge we face as a country, is how do we make decisions that will strengthen the middle class, create good, robust growth in which opportunity is broadly shared for a long time to come.
So is it fair to say that while there's been a lot of post-election conversation about things like climate change and things like immigration reform, this is really an economics and jobs speech tonight?
Well, I think, it's a State of the Union speech. He's going to cover all of those. And, the president once said when he was running for president in 2008, when you're president of the United States, you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to handle numerous challenges at once. And the economic challenges are fundamental. They're going to define our future. But these other issues are very, very important as well. So I think you'll hear a very strong economic case, but also deal with some of the other challenges that he believes Congress should deal with and deal with soon.
So David, should we expect a president tonight who's accommodating or confrontational toward the Republicans in that House chamber?
I don't think either. I think he's going to be firm about what he believes, but also emphasize the need to cooperate and find common ground on some of these issues. I don't think anybody in America has much more patience for gridlock and two parties at loggerheads. People want to see progress. The president wants to see progress. There's an opportunity to make progress on a wide array of issues if we're willing to work together. I think that'll be a theme of his speech.
David Axelrod, thanks for a little preview. We appreciate it. Hope to talk to you as time rolls on.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Thanks, David. Let's turn now to Larry Sabato, who's head of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Larry's been with us before to talk about the arc of the Obama administration. Larry, thanks for joining us again tonight.
Sure, Jerry.
Hey, one of the questions I have, Larry, is that, there was a widespread feeling that we discussed after the president's inaugural address a couple of weeks ago that he had, in that address, moved to the left, that it was more of a liberal agenda than people expected. Would you expect him to stay on that track tonight or to tack back toward the center in a State of the Union address?
I don't know if he's going to tack back. He's supposed to talk more about the economy than about the social issues that he dwelt upon in the inaugural address. Jerry, he's speaking to a different audience. This audience has an awful lot of Republicans who can determine whether any of his programs go through in the second term. And as you know better than I do, it's looking kind of grim for most of them.
Well, that's true, and it raises an interesting question of who he's really talking to tonight. When we listen to this president, is he talking to the people in the House of Representatives chamber, or is he talking to the country beyond? That's a classic question about any State of the Union.
In this particular case, I think he's concluded correctly that the Republicans in the House and many of those in the Senate are not going to be moved on many of his priorities. So his goal is probably to build support in the country and to energize his base for executive actions that he's going to take unilaterally. I think we're going to see an awful lot of that in his second term. He's going to push the edge of the envelope on executive orders and executive actions in the foreign sphere.
You know, he does act an awful lot right now, at least, like a president who's got the political wind at his back and who's facing Republicans who have some problems. Do you think he's right? And is there a danger of overplaying your hand under those conditions?
He's right in one sense. Clearly, he's more popular than the Republicans are in Congress. There's just one problem with that. Constitutionally, and as a result of Election Day, the Republicans have the ability to stymie virtually anything he wants, at least outside the executive realm. So he can certainly push the advantage that he's got in public opinion. It's just that it doesn't do him any good in Congress.
You know, one of the things that is likely to be corrected tonight, and you referred to it at the outset here, is the mix between social issues and the economy and jobs. You know, there is a question about where the public's priority is, and my sense is that people are still wrapped up in an awful lot of economic anxiety. Do you expect that to be the backdrop for the president's comments tonight?
It should be, because that really is what most people are concerned about. Yes, they have opinions on the social issues and no doubt like or dislike some of the directions in which Obama's moving, but we're still an economy-based, economic-oriented electorate. And so a president in a State of the Union address with a bad economy ought to focus on the economy.
And just final question for you, Larry. Would you try to strike a confrontational tone or an accommodating tone toward Republicans tonight if you were in President Obama's shoes?
You know what, Jerry? I bet he does both. Sometimes he's going to be as sweet as honey, and other times just as tough as nails. It will depend on the subject, and he's sending different messages to different groups. I don't think it could do him any harm. I don't think it's going to do him a lot of good. I don't think this is going to be a State of the Union address that moves anybody, at least in Congress.
So you don't sound like somebody who thinks the era of partisan warfare is about to subside in Washington.
No, I think this polarization in Congress and out will continue probably for the rest of the Obama administration, maybe beyond.
Well, Larry Sabato, we'll see shortly. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Jerry.
We'll be right back with the mayor of San Antonio, as we said, a rising Democratic star, Julian Castro, after this break. Welcome back to the Wall Street Journal's live coverage of President Obama's State of the Union address, which will begin shortly. We're talking about some of the themes we're likely to hear in that State of the Union address, and we're happy to be joined now by the mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, who's in San Antonio. Mayor, thank you. Mayor Castro, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Listen, one of the themes that's going to be talked about tonight, inevitably, and maybe at some length, is immigration reform, a subject that you've been talking about and been doing some work on. How close do you think the two parties in Washington are on figuring out a way to address this issue? Or are the fissures just starting to become clear?
Well, there's no question that there's some reason for hope, particularly because the Senate, group of 8 senators, as you know, a bipartisan group, as well as the president, have put together a framework for moving forward on comprehensive immigration reform that is pretty close to each other. The question now is, and this is why I was testifying last week in front of the House Judiciary Committee, the question is, what will House Republicans do? And The rub right now seems to be the question of what to do with the 11 million undocumented, illegal, whatever word you want to use, 11 million folks who are here right now. The Democratic position and the bipartisan working group, at least, are willing to consider a path to citizenship, whereas it seems like the House Republicans do not support a path to citizenship. They want to keep the folks in some sort of legal limbo. My hope is that they'll be able to work that out and offer a path to citizenship after folks pay a fine, pay back taxes, learn English, and go to the back of the line.
So, Mayor Castro, do you suppose there's anything that the president could say tonight that might help resolve that impasse, or is that just going to have to be worked through in weeks and months to come?
Well, I believe that he can move the ball forward on it by highlighting, I believe that he may highlight the personal stories, the human stories of some of those 11 million folks, whether it's young folks with a promising future that would benefit from the DREAM Act component of it, or folks who have served in the military. These 11 million folks that are very proud to be in the United States and have a lot to contribute. But I think it's also fair to say that most of this is going to be done in the back and forth in the Congress.
But I noted, it's interesting you say that. I noted earlier today that one of the people sitting in the First Lady's box tonight watching the speech is going to be one of those dreamers, a child of the illegal undocumented aliens. And there's a big move in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party to find a way to leave those people a path toward legal status. And I think that's the consensus item in this front, isn't it?
Yeah. I will say that of all the issues out there, it does seem like the election had the biggest impact on this issue of immigration reform. The parties are not nearly as far apart as they were before, and so there's some hope that with a bit of a push on both sides of the aisle, that this thing can happen.
Mayor Castro, let me ask you one final question. You know, you're a mayor, it takes you close to the grassroots, obviously. What's your sense of how much attention people want to see paid here on issues such as immigration reform versus the core economic issues, versus the bread and butter, meat and potatoes issues?
In my mind, there's no question that no matter what part of the country you're in or what someone's background, the meat and potatoes issue is the economy. And people want to make sure when they have confidence that there's a plan so that we can grow the middle class, create new jobs, prepare people for entering the workforce of tomorrow. That has to be front and center, and I'm confident that President Obama will put it front and center. But issues like immigration reform are also important, and they deserve to be highlighted in the speech.
Mayor Castro, thanks for sharing some thoughts with us tonight. We'll see what the balance is shortly.
Thanks for having me.
Let's turn now to somebody who actually knows how these speeches are put together. Paul Orszalak, who's a former speechwriter for Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and he's joining us from our Washington bureau. Paul, thanks for being with us tonight.
Hi, Jerry. Thanks. Good to be here.
Listen, let's talk a little bit about this creature we're discussing tonight, the State of the Union address. You know, what can a president really hope to achieve here? And how do you stop it from being something other than an hour-long laundry list of things I would like to see happen in my town?
Well, in truth, somebody tweeted just a few minutes ago that the State of the Union tonight is distracted. And for the last 2 days, between the Pope and now the standoff in California, this is probably the first time in recent memory where the national attention is elsewhere leading up to the State of the Union address. But, you know, this is the one time each year that the president addresses the American people without a filter, without being parsed by journalists or others. About 38 million people tuned in last time around, and it's a chance to present his case to the American people following the election. Typically, about half of the policies that are proposed in this particular address, the first to start a second term, get adopted one way or another. But I don't know that anybody really feels that this Congress is going to pass anywhere near that amount of legislation for this president. The goal is always to find one or two themes that you can carry through all these issues and somehow animate all these issues while also addressing all these priorities that you have. It's hard not to turn it into a laundry list. It always seems to for people at home. But if the issues are described compellingly enough, people really listen, as we saw every time Bill Clinton presented one of these. So will anybody listen tonight in the chamber? Probably not. I mean, to me, the party showed its seriousness when they decided to put Ted Nugent in the gallery to listen to him tonight. But, it's a great national spectacle that will probably be forgotten in about 24 hours.
Interesting point. While we were talking, Paul, the First Lady entered her box, and I believe the President's about to come in. Just one final very quick question. Who do you talk to when you're giving the speech? Are you talking to the nation or are you talking to the Congress?
In past years, it's been both. My guess this year, he's going to speak to the people that support his program, about 50 to 60%. He's going to speak to the American people to continue to apply pressure to folks that don't necessarily share their views. I think the Republican Party found in this the last election that on a lot of issues, immigration, climate change, guns, they're on the wrong side of history. And there's a good amount of enlightened self-interest at work in the party right now that something needs to get done, but only if that pressure continues to get applied from the American people. And I think that's who the President will direct his message to tonight.
Just a quick footnote here. There are always some real people sitting in the First Lady's box. There'll be a bunch of them tonight, 24 I counted. Does that trick still work, or has that outlived its usefulness?
Well, a lot of local news usually leads with the people that are in the box because it's the human element of this. The President can tell stories of people, but, there's nobody. You can say 10,000 words about guns, or you can show a dad who lost a child in Newtown, and, if ever there's a case of the picture's worth 1,000 words, it's that. So it's still effective because it still allows people to have a human moment in the middle of one of these speeches, and that's why you still have 24 people in the box.
Well, we'll see some of those 24 people shortly. Paul Orszalek, you're going to be kind enough to join us after the speech for a little post-game analysis. We'll talk to you then. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Jerry.
We're going to turn now to somebody who's thought about the broader context of State of the Union addresses. Rick Shankman is a presidential historian and editor-in-chief of the History News Network. He'll be joining us shortly. Let me talk a little bit about what's happening in the House chamber right now. First, though, we saw the First Lady entering. This is a ritual. This ritual has been perfected over the years. The First Lady enters, sits in her box. The Cabinet comes in, and you're seeing some members of the Cabinet, Arne Duncan, the Education Secretary, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, and some other members of the Cabinet. They come down the aisle, minus always one Cabinet member. One Cabinet member does not enter the chamber of the House of Representatives for this speech because somebody needs to stay behind in case of disaster. So there's a member of the leadership team left if disaster should befall the country. Tonight, that's Stephen Chu, who's the Energy Secretary, and the outgoing Energy Secretary, actually. He's not going to be there. Everybody else in the Cabinet, I assume, will be. You saw a few members of the Supreme Court in an earlier shot. There's been some controversy about their attendance in recent years. Justices of the Supreme Court used to come out en masse for State of the Union addresses. They haven't done so much in recent years, and they were particularly upset when the President criticized the Supreme Court decision on political campaign finance 2 years ago. And that is believed to have prompted some of them to stay away last year. We'll see exactly what the roll call is like of Supreme Court justices this year. Some of those members of the House of Representatives that you're seeing shaking hands with Cabinet members as the Cabinet members move down the aisle aren't there by accident. They started showing up hours ago. It's a little like tailgating before a football game. They started showing up to reserve seats along the aisle for themselves, bringing reading material, and in one case, one of our reporters said earlier today, an iPad so they could stay busy while holding the prime seats. There's obviously something to be said for being seen on TV, shaking the hands of Cabinet members and, in a few minutes, the President as he comes down the aisle. Again, you're seeing there some of the guests in the First Lady's box. That's Dr. Jill Biden, obviously wife of the Vice President Joe Biden, in that box as well. The State of the Union is a ritual that wasn't always with us. It's vaguely required under the Constitution, but not specifically required under the Constitution. We're going to talk about that and some more of the history of State of the Union addresses right now with Rick Shankman, who's a presidential historian and editor-in-chief of the History News Network, who's joining us from Seattle. Rick, thanks for being with us. We've talked before. Glad to have you back.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about State of the Union addresses, how they've evolved over time, and what purpose they really serve for the president who gives them at this state in history.
Well, it's right in the Constitution. It says that the president from time to time shall tell the Congress about basically how the country is doing and how the government's doing. For all of the 19th century, those addresses were delivered in a printed form. Basically, they just sent up a message over to the Congress, and somebody in the Congress stood up and read it. The president did not do that until Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had a sense of flair for the dramatic, and he started, as soon as he became president, he started delivering addresses directly to the Congress. And by the time the State of the Union address came around, well, he was an old hand and the country was ready for it. Teddy Roosevelt, who was a big personality, he was sorry that he hadn't thought of it.
Sorry, because it seems to have worked for presidents, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Every president loves to be able to set the national agenda. So when you have an audience, boy, you know, there's not a politician around who doesn't want a big audience.
Yeah, and this night gives him a big audience, and an audience that's sort of captive in the sense that nobody really gets to talk back to the president. It's not a press conference until the Republicans give their response afterwards.
Yeah, well, except for Joe Wilson, if you remember a couple of years ago, you lied. But yeah, mostly they just have to sit there and applaud, and the Democrats stand up a bunch of times. The Republicans, most of the time, will sit on their hands. But it's a great opportunity for a president to really help set the national agenda. And this is his main job. Yeah. This is not a side job for him. It's his main job, is setting the national agenda, because the system is geared to having sand in the gears. So only the president can really disrupt the inertia and get the thing moving.
So, Rick, what makes a second term, a beginning of a second term State of the Union different from your run-of-the-mill State of the Union?
Well, their re-election. There's just a small number of presidents who have been re-elected, about half of them basically, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. Most of the time, they're disappointed. Those second terms of presidents tend to be either filled with scandal or some bad thing happens in foreign policy. They're not typically, they don't turn out well. But the second term curse, as it's called, there's nothing inevitable about it. I'm not a determinist. I believe that Obama's got a chance here to help get his second term off to a good start. Of course, he's just coming off the inauguration. Mostly he got fairly positive reviews. I saw even Senator Orrin Hatch thought it was a great speech. So who knows? We'll see. He's got to have the country behind him. That's when a president can do good things or big things, when he's got the wind at his back. So this is a chance for him. At the same time, I'll tell you, political scientists say that big speeches rarely move the needle of public opinion.
Well, you know, that's a good question, because right now there's a question of how much wind this president has behind his back. His approval ratings are pretty good, but not great. On the other hand, his opponents, I guess, in Washington are Republicans in Congress whose approval ratings are much, much lower. So I guess it's all relative. In historic terms, how well positioned is this second-term president?
His ratings are actually fairly low, and I saw some new ones that came out that showed that just even in the last couple of weeks since the inaugural address, his numbers have gone down. He's coming into his second term in a weaker position, for instance, far weaker than Bill Clinton came in '97 when he delivered his first State of the Union address in the second term. So, and Ronald Reagan had better numbers. So he's not in a great position, but the Republicans are in a far worse position. And their party is divided, deeply divided over Tea Party issues and such. And they've lost so many presidential elections in a row now where they've lost the popular vote. So he's not envious of the Republicans. He's got to just keep his party unified and keep the coalition going that he had in the election, which is just really, 2 months ago.
You know, Rick, a lot of us in Washington tend to say that essentially there are only a few months, or there's a limited amount of time. Let me just pause here for a second. I think we're going to have the president entering the chamber here shortly.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
And there is the president, obviously. That's the traditional way he's welcomed into the House. go to Rick. So there is the president, obviously entering the chamber of the House of Representatives. It's a long walk from that door to the lectern where he'll speak because he's got to shake a lot of hands along the way. It'll take a couple of minutes. And as he makes that walk, we're still talking with Rick Shankman, a presidential historian. Rick, I think you're still with us. I was about to ask before the president interrupted us. You know, there is this tendency for those of us in Washington to think that a second-term president has only a limited amount of time to get his agenda pushed through. Pretty soon he becomes a lame duck, midterm elections come into play, and he loses political capital. Do you think that's right, or is that overstated?
I do think it's overstated. Ronald Reagan got through the Tax Reform Act of '86. That's his midterm of his second term. And that was hugely important, quite memorable. That was one of those legacy projects. If you look up Ronald Reagan, any of those presidential encyclopedias, usually in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, they mention it. So I do think that the media has gone overboard on this. Obama, you know, he's the president of the United States. If in domestic affairs, all of a sudden he finds that his hands are tied because, let's say in the midterms, Democrats lose seats, as the party that's in power normally does in the midterms of the second term, he can gaze in foreign policy. And there's all kinds of opportunities in foreign policy. Of course, there's opportunities to mess up as well. But
that's true. And they seem to find second-term presidents as much as anybody. So, we'll see. Rick Shankman, listen, I think you're going to stick around and join us after the speech for a little post-game analysis. Appreciate that very much, and we'll talk to you then. As the president continues to work his way toward the lectern in the House of Representatives, I'm joined by my colleague and friend John Bussey, columnist for the Wall Street Journal. You know, John, thanks for being with us. Pleasure. You know, one of the things we haven't talked about, we've talked a lot about the politics in the last few minutes. We haven't talked about what people on the outside, particularly the business community, might be expecting or at least hoping from this president. That's been a pretty strained relationship.
Yeah, that's right. And they are looking not only at the strained relationship that they have with this president, though the Obama administration would say quite to the contrary, we've had a lot of outreach to business. But they're looking at the situation in Washington. Call it what you will, gridlock, stasis, seizure. They see an economy that is not resolving itself on the big issues, entitlements, the deficit. And what's the implication of that? Well, the implication is that there's a lot of cash that's being sat on, and a lot of investment that's being deferred because of expectation of possible tax changes, but also just not certainty about slow growth in the economy, whether that's just going to continue because of Washington. So the implications of this speech, they're going to be, business is going to be dissecting it, trying to see whether or not there are indications that there's going to be some kind of incremental, hopefully, resolution of the problems in Washington.
You know, one of the things that I think I've sensed in Washington in the weeks since the election is a certain amount of frustration on the part of big business in particular with not just the president, but with Republicans. I think business is weary of this sort of seemingly endless series of budget battles that come to no good end and that kick cans down the road. Is that your sense of it as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, CEOs that you talk with, that I talk with, there seems to be a kind of a non-denominational frustration,
right?
Exactly.
Equal opportunity frustration.
Yeah, I think very much. And there's kind of an expectation that these are companies, like them or don't like them, like the CEO or don't like them. They're led, and they're in the private sector, and they have daily pressures, and they have to have resolution of those problems. And so you choose the best door, and you walk through it, and you hope for the best. Yeah. And that's kind of the mentality of business, and they don't see that happening in Washington, do they?
You know, I think there's going to be some words in the speech based on things the White House was saying ahead of time about unlocking the manufacturing capacity of the country, but that's more easily said than done, isn't it?
Well, I think that's, there's a subtext there. Unlocking the manufacturing capacity, what does that really mean? Well, that means somehow stimulating it. And the president does have a tailwind in this regard. He has rapidly falling energy prices in the United States.
So we will find out in a minute here. The president's about to speak. We will join you afterwards. The President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I give this to you right now? Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please, everybody else. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, fellow Americans. 51 years ago, John F. Kennedy declared to this chamber that the Constitution makes us not rivals for power, but partners for progress. It is my task, he said, to report the State of the Union. To improve it is the task of us all. Tonight, thanks to the grit and determination of the American people, there is much progress to report. After a decade of grinding war, our brave men and women in uniform are coming home. After years of grueling recession, our businesses have created over 6 million new jobs. We buy more American cars than we have in 5 years, and less foreign oil than we have in 20. Our housing market is healing, our stock market is rebounding, and consumers, patients, and homeowners enjoy stronger protections than ever before. So, together, we have cleared away the rubble of crisis. And we can say with renewed confidence that the state of our union is stronger. But we gather here knowing that there are millions of Americans whose hard work and dedication have not yet been rewarded. Our economy is adding jobs, but too many people still can't find full-time employment. Corporate profits have skyrocketed to all-time highs, but for more than a decade, wages and incomes have barely budged. It is our generation's task, then, to reignite the true engine of America's economic growth, a rising, thriving middle class. It is our unfinished task to restore the basic bargain that built this country. The idea that if you work hard and meet your responsibilities, you can get ahead, no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like or who you love. It is our unfinished task to make sure that this government works on behalf of the many and not just the few, that it encourages free enterprise, rewards individual initiative, and opens the doors of opportunity to every child across this great nation. The American people don't expect government to solve every problem. They don't expect those of us in this chamber to agree on every issue. But they do expect us to put the nation's interests before party. they do expect us to forge reasonable compromise where we can. For they know that America moves forward only when we do so together, and that the responsibility of improving this union remains the task of us all. Now, our work must begin by making some basic decisions about our budget, decisions that will have a huge impact on the strength of our recovery. Over the last few years, both parties have worked together to reduce the deficit by more than $2.5 trillion, mostly through spending cuts, but also by raising tax rates on the wealthiest 1% of Americans. As a result, we are more than halfway towards the goal of $4 trillion in deficit reduction that economists say we need to stabilize our finances. Now we need to finish the job. And the question is, how? In 2011, Congress passed a law saying that if both parties couldn't agree on a plan to reach our deficit goal, about $1 trillion worth of budget cuts would automatically go into effect this year. These sudden, harsh, arbitrary cuts would jeopardize our military readiness. They devastate priorities like education and energy and medical research. They would certainly slow our recovery and cost us hundreds of thousands of jobs. And that's why Democrats, Republicans, business leaders, and economists have already said that these cuts, known here in Washington as the sequester, are a really bad idea. Now, some in Congress have proposed preventing only the defense cuts by making even bigger cuts to things like education and job training, Medicare, and Social Security benefits. That idea is even worse. Yes, the biggest driver of our long-term debt is the rising cost of health care for an aging population. And those of us who care deeply about programs like Medicare must embrace the need for modest reforms. Otherwise, our retirement programs will crowd out the investments we need for our children and jeopardize the promise of a secure retirement for future generations. But we can't ask senior citizens and working families to shoulder the entire burden of deficit reduction while asking nothing more from the wealthiest and the most powerful. We won't grow the middle class simply by shifting the cost of health care or college onto families that are already struggling, or by forcing communities to lay off more teachers and more cops and more firefighters. Most Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, understand that we can't just cut our way to prosperity. They know that broad-based economic growth requires a balanced approach to deficit reduction, with spending cuts and revenue, and with everybody doing their fair share. And that's the approach I offer tonight. On Medicare, I'm prepared to enact reforms that will achieve the same amount of health care savings by the beginning of the next decade as the reforms proposed by the bipartisan Simpson-Bowles Commission. Already, the Affordable Care Act is helping to slow the growth of health care costs. And the reforms I'm proposing go even further. We'll reduce taxpayer subsidies to prescription drug companies and ask more from the wealthiest seniors. We'll bring down costs by changing the way our government pays for Medicare, because our medical bills shouldn't be based on the number of tests ordered or days spent in the hospital. They should be based on the quality of care that our seniors receive. And I am open to additional reforms from both parties, so long as they don't violate the guarantee of a secure retirement. Our government shouldn't make promises we cannot keep, but we must keep the promises we've already made. to hit the rest of our deficit reduction target, we should do what leaders in both parties have already suggested and save hundreds of billions of dollars by getting rid of tax loopholes and deductions for the well-off and the well-connected. After all, why would we choose to make deeper cuts to education and Medicare just to protect special interest tax breaks? How is that fair? Why is it that deficit reduction is a big emergency, justifying making cuts in Social Security benefits but not closing some loopholes? How does that promote growth? Now is our best chance for bipartisan, comprehensive tax reform that encourages job creation and helps bring down the deficit. We can get this done. The American people deserve a tax code that helps small businesses spend less time filling out complicated forms and more time expanding and hiring. A tax code that ensures billionaires with high-powered accountants can't work the system and pay a lower rate than their hard-working secretaries. A tax code that lowers incentives to move jobs overseas and lowers tax rates for businesses and manufacturers that are creating jobs right here in the United States of America. That's what tax reform can deliver. That's what we can do together. I realize that tax reform and entitlement reform will not be easy. The politics will be hard for both sides. None of us will get 100% of what we want. But the alternative will cost us jobs, hurt our economy, visit hardship on millions of hard-working Americans. So let's set party interests aside and work to pass a budget that replaces reckless cuts with smart savings and wise investments in our future. And let's do it without the brinksmanship that stresses consumers and scares off investors. The greatest nation on earth cannot keep conducting its business by drifting from one manufactured crisis to the next. We can't do it. Let's agree. Let's agree right here, right now, to keep the people's government open and pay our bills on time and always uphold the full faith and credit of the United States of America. The American people have worked too hard for too long, rebuilding from one crisis to see their elected officials cause another. Now, most of us agree that a plan to reduce the deficit must be part of our agenda. But let's be clear. Deficit reduction alone is not an economic plan. A growing economy that creates good middle-class jobs, that must be the North Star that guides our efforts. Every day, we should ask ourselves three questions as a nation. How do we attract more jobs to our shores? How do we equip our people with the skills they need to get those jobs? And how do we make sure that hard work leads to a decent living? Now, a year and a half ago, I put forward an American Jobs Act that independent economists said would create more than 1 million new jobs. And I thank the last Congress for passing some of that agenda. I urge this Congress to pass the rest. But tonight I'll lay out additional proposals that are fully paid for and fully consistent with the budget framework both parties agreed to just 18 months ago. Let me repeat. Nothing I'm proposing tonight should increase our deficit by a single dime. It is not a bigger government we need, but a smarter government that sets priorities and invests in broad-based growth. That's what we should be looking for. Our first priority is making America a magnet for new jobs in manufacturing. After shedding jobs for more than 10 years, our manufacturers have added about 500,000 jobs over the past 3. Caterpillar is bringing jobs back from Japan. Ford is bringing jobs back from Mexico. And this year, Apple will start making Macs in America again. There are things we can do right now to accelerate this trend. Last year, we created our first Manufacturing Innovation Institute in Youngstown, Ohio. A once shuttered warehouse is now a state-of-the-art lab where new workers are mastering the 3D printing that has the potential to revolutionize the way we make almost everything. There's no reason this can't happen in other towns. So tonight, I'm announcing the launch of 3 more of these manufacturing hubs, where businesses will partner with the Department of Defense and Energy to turn regions left behind by globalization into global centers of high-tech jobs. And I ask this Congress to help create a network of 15 of these hubs and guarantee that the next revolution in manufacturing is made right here in America. We can get that done. Now, if we want to make the best products, we also have to invest in the best ideas. Every dollar we invested to map the human genome returned $140 to our economy. Every dollar. Today, our scientists are mapping the human brain to unlock the answers to Alzheimer's. They're developing drugs to regenerate damaged organs, devising new materials to make batteries 10 times more powerful. Now is not the time to gut these job-creating investments in science and innovation. Now is the time to reach a level of research and development not seen since the height of the space race. We need to make those investments. Today, no area holds more promise than our investments in American energy. After years of talking about it, we're finally poised to control our own energy future. We produce more oil at home than we have in 15 years. We have doubled the distance our cars will go on a gallon of gas and the amount of renewable energy we generate from sources like wind and solar, with tens of thousands of good American jobs to show for it. We produce more natural gas than ever before, and nearly everyone's energy bill is lower because of it. And over the last 4 years, our emissions of the dangerous carbon pollution that threatens our planet have actually fallen. But for the sake of our children and our future, we must do more to combat climate change. Now, it's true that no single event makes a trend. But the fact is, the 12 hottest years on record have all come in the last 15. Heat waves, droughts, wildfires, floods, all are now more frequent and more intense. We can choose to believe that Superstorm Sandy and the most severe drought in decades and the worst wildfires some states have ever seen were all just a freak coincidence. Or we can choose to believe in the overwhelming judgment of science and act before it's too late. Now, the good news is we can make meaningful progress on this issue while driving strong economic growth. I urge this Congress to get together, pursue a bipartisan market-based solution to climate change, like the one John McCain and Joe Lieberman worked on together a few years ago. But if Congress won't act soon to protect future generations, I will. I will direct I will direct my cabinet to come up with executive actions we can take now and in the future to reduce pollution, prepare our communities for the consequences of climate change, and speed the transition to more sustainable sources of energy. And 4 years ago, other countries dominated the clean energy market and the jobs that came with it. And we've begun to change that. Last year, wind energy added nearly half of all new power capacity in America. So let's generate even more. Solar energy gets cheaper by the year. Let's drive down costs even further. As long as countries like China keep going all in on clean energy, so must we. Now, in the meantime, the natural gas boom has led to cleaner power and greater energy independence. We need to encourage that. And that's why my administration will keep cutting red tape and speeding up new oil and gas permits. That's got to be part of an all-of-the-above plan. But I also want to work with this Congress to encourage the research and technology that helps natural gas burn even cleaner and protects our air and our water. In fact, much of our newfound energy is drawn from lands and waters that we, the public, own together. So tonight I propose we use some of our oil and gas revenues to fund an energy security trust that will drive new research and technology to shift our cars and trucks off oil for good. If a nonpartisan coalition of CEOs and retired generals and admirals can get behind this idea, then so can we. Let's take their advice and free our families and businesses from the painful spikes in gas prices we put up with for far too long. I'm also issuing a new goal for America. Let's cut in half the energy wasted by our homes and businesses over the next 20 years. We'll work with the states to do it. Those states with the best ideas to create jobs and lower energy bills by constructing more efficient buildings will receive federal support to help make that happen. America's energy sector is just one part of an aging infrastructure badly in need of repair. Ask any CEO where they'd rather locate and hire: a country with deteriorating roads and bridges, or one with high-speed rail and internet, high-tech schools, self-healing power grids. The CEO of Siemens America, a company that brought hundreds of new jobs to North Carolina, said that if we upgrade our infrastructure, they'll bring even more jobs. And that's the attitude of a lot of companies all around the world. And I know you want these job-creating projects in your district. I've seen all those ribbon cuttings. So, tonight, I propose a Fix-It-First program to put people to work as soon as possible on our most urgent repairs, like the nearly 70,000 structurally deficient bridges across the country. And to make sure taxpayers don't shoulder the whole burden, I'm also proposing a partnership to rebuild America that attracts private capital to upgrade what our businesses need most: modern ports to move our goods, modern pipelines to withstand a storm, modern schools worthy of our children. Let's prove there's no better place to do business than here in the United States of America, and let's start right away. We can get this done. And part of our rebuilding effort must also involve our housing sector. The good news is our housing market is finally healing from the collapse of 2007. Home prices are rising at the fastest pace in 6 years. Home purchases are up nearly 50%, and construction is expanding again. But even with mortgage rates near a 50-year low, too many families with solid credit who want to buy a home are being rejected. Too many families who never missed a payment and want to refinance are being told no. That's holding our entire economy back. We need to fix it. Right now, there's a bill in this Congress that would give every responsible homeowner in America the chance to save $3,000 a year by refinancing at today's rates. Democrats and Republicans have supported it before. So what are we waiting for? Take a vote and send me that bill. Why would we be against that? Why would that be a partisan issue? Helping folks refinance. Right now, overlapping regulations keep responsible young families from buying their first home. What's holding us back? Let's streamline the process and help our economy grow. Now, these initiatives in manufacturing, energy, infrastructure, housing, all these things will help entrepreneurs and small business owners expand and create new jobs. But none of it will matter unless we also equip our citizens with the skills and training to fill those jobs. And that has to start at the earliest possible age. You know, study after study shows that the sooner a child begins learning, the better he or she does down the road. But today, fewer than 3 in 10 4-year-olds are enrolled in a high-quality preschool program. Most middle-class parents can't afford a few $100 a week for a private preschool. And for poor kids who need help the most, this lack of access to preschool education can shadow them for the rest of their lives. So tonight, I propose working with states to make high-quality preschool available to every single child in America. That's something we should be able to do. Every dollar we invest in high-quality early childhood education can save more than $7 later on by boosting graduation rates, reducing teen pregnancy, even reducing violent crime. In states that make it a priority to educate our youngest children, like Georgia or Oklahoma, studies show students grow up more likely to read and do math at grade level, graduate high school, hold a job, form more stable families of their own. We know this works. So let's do what works and make sure none of our children start the race of life already behind. Let's give our kids that chance. Let's also make sure that a high school diploma puts our kids on a path to a good job. Right now, countries like Germany focus on graduating their high school students with the equivalent of a technical degree from one of our community colleges. So those German kids, they're ready for a job when they graduate high school. They've been trained for the jobs that are there. Now at schools like P-Tech in Brooklyn, a collaboration between New York Public Schools and City University of New York and IBM, students will graduate with a high school diploma and an associate's degree in computers or engineering. We need to give every American student opportunities like this. And 4 years ago, we started Race to the Top, the competition that convinced almost every state to develop smarter curricula and higher standards, all for about 1% of what we spend on education each year. Tonight, I'm announcing a new challenge to redesign America's high schools so they better equip graduates for the demands of a high-tech economy. And we'll reward schools that develop new partnerships with colleges and employers and create classes that focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. The skills today's employers are looking for to fill the jobs that are there right now and will be there in the future. Now, even with better high schools, most young people will need some higher education. It's a simple fact. The more education you've got, the more likely you are to have a good job and work your way into the middle class. But today's skyrocketing costs price too many young people out of a higher education or saddle them with unsustainable debt. Through tax credits, grants, and better loans, we've made college more affordable for millions of students and families over the last few years. But taxpayers can't keep on subsidizing higher and higher and higher costs for higher education. Colleges must do their part to keep costs down, and it's our job to make sure that they do. So tonight, I ask Congress to change the Higher Education Act so that affordability and value are included in determining which colleges receive certain types of federal aid. And tomorrow, my administration will release a new college scorecard that parents and students can use to compare schools based on a simple criteria: where you can get the most bang for your educational buck. Now, to grow our middle class, our citizens have to have access to the education and training that today's jobs require. But we also have to make sure that America remains a place where everyone who's willing to work, everybody who's willing to work hard, has the chance to get ahead. Our economy is stronger when we harness the talents and ingenuity of striving, hopeful immigrants. And right now, leaders from the business, labor, law enforcement, faith communities, they all agree that the time has come to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to get it done. Now's the time to get it done. Real reform means stronger border security, and we can build on the progress my administration's already made, putting more boots on the southern border than at any time in our history, and reducing illegal crossings to their lowest levels in 40 years. Real reform means establishing a responsible pathway to earned citizenship, a path that includes passing a background check, paying taxes and a meaningful penalty, learning English, and going to the back of the line behind the folks trying to come here legally. And real reform means fixing the legal immigration system to cut waiting periods and attract the highly skilled entrepreneurs and engineers that will help create jobs and grow our economy. In other words, we know what needs to be done. And as we speak, bipartisan groups in both chambers are working diligently to draft a bill, and I applaud their efforts. So let's get this done. Send me a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the next few months, and I will sign it right away, and America will be better for it. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. But we can't stop there. We know our economy is stronger when our wives, our mothers, our daughters can live their lives free from discrimination in the workplace and free from the fear of domestic violence. Today, the Senate passed the Violence Against Women's Act that Joe Biden originally wrote almost 20 years ago, and I now urge the House to do the same. Good job, Joe. And I ask this Congress to declare that women should earn a living equal to their efforts, and finally pass the Paycheck Fairness Act this year. We know our economy is stronger when we reward an honest day's work with honest wages. But today, a full-time worker making the minimum wage earns $14,500 a year, even with the tax relief we put in place. A family with 2 kids that earns the minimum wage still lives below the poverty line. That's wrong. That's why, since the last time this Congress raised the minimum wage, 19 states have chosen to bump theirs even higher. Tonight, let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour. We should be able to get that done. This single step would raise the incomes of millions of working families. It could mean the difference between groceries or the food bank, rent or eviction, scraping by or finally getting ahead. For businesses across the country, it would mean customers with more money in their pockets. And a whole lot of folks out there would probably need less help from government. In fact, working folks shouldn't have to wait year after year for the minimum wage to go up, while CEO pay has never been higher. So here's an idea that Governor Romney and I actually agreed on last year. Let's tie the minimum wage to the cost of living so that it finally becomes a wage you can live on. Tonight, let's also recognize that there are communities in this country where, no matter how hard you work, it is virtually impossible to get ahead. Factory towns decimated from years of plants packing up, inescapable pockets of poverty, urban and rural, where young adults are still fighting for their first job. America is not a place where the chance of birth or circumstance should decide our destiny. And that's why we need to build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class for all who are willing to climb them. Let's offer incentives to companies that hire Americans who've got what it takes to fill that job opening but have been out of work so long that no one will give them a chance anymore. Let's put people back to work rebuilding vacant homes in rundown neighborhoods. And this year, my administration will begin to partner with 20 of the hardest hit towns in America to get these communities back on their feet. Now, we'll work with local leaders to target resources at public safety and education and housing. We'll give new tax credits to businesses that hire and invest. And we'll work to strengthen families by removing the financial deterrence to marriage for low-income couples, and do more to encourage fatherhood. Because what makes you a man isn't the ability to conceive a child, it's having the courage to raise one. And we want to encourage that. We want to help that. Stronger families, stronger communities, a stronger America. It is this kind of prosperity, broad, shared, built on a thriving middle class, that has always been the source of our progress at home. It's also the foundation of our power and influence throughout the world. Tonight, we stand united in saluting the troops and civilians who sacrifice every day to protect us. Because of them, we can say with confidence that America will complete its mission in Afghanistan and achieve our objective of defeating the core of al-Qaeda. Already, we have brought home 33,000 of our brave servicemen and women. This spring, our forces will move into a support role, while Afghan security forces take the lead. Tonight, I can announce that over the next year, another 34,000 American troops will come home from Afghanistan. This drawdown will continue, and by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over. Beyond 2014, America's commitment to a unified and sovereign Afghanistan will endure. But the nature of our commitment will change. We're negotiating an agreement with the Afghan government that focuses on two missions: training and equipping Afghan forces so that the country does not again slip into chaos, and counterterrorism efforts that allow us to pursue the remnants of al-Qaeda and their affiliates. Today, the organization that attacked us on 9/11 is a shadow of its former self. It's true, different al-Qaeda affiliates and extremist groups have emerged from the Arabian Peninsula to Africa. The threat these groups pose is evolving. But to meet this threat, we don't need to send tens of thousands of our sons and daughters abroad or occupy other nations. Instead, we'll need to help countries like Yemen, Libya, and Somalia provide for their own security and help allies who take the fight to terrorists, as we have in Mali. And where necessary, through a range of capabilities, we will continue to take direct action against those terrorists who pose the gravest threat to Americans. Now, as we do, we must enlist our values in the fight. That's why my administration has worked tirelessly to forge a durable legal and policy framework to guide our counterterrorism efforts. Throughout, we have kept Congress fully informed of our efforts. And I recognize that in our democracy, no one should just take my word for it that we're doing things the right way. So in the months ahead, I will continue to engage Congress to ensure not only that our targeting, detention, and prosecution of terrorists remains consistent with our laws and system of checks and balances, but that our efforts are even more transparent to the American people and to the world. Of course, our challenges don't end with al-Qaeda. America will continue to lead the effort to prevent the spread of the world's most dangerous weapons. The regime in North Korea must know they will only achieve security and prosperity by meeting their international obligations. Provocations of the sort we saw last night will only further isolate them as we stand by our allies, strengthen our own missile defense, and lead the world in taking firm action in response to these threats. Likewise, the leaders of Iran must recognize that now is the time for a diplomatic solution because a coalition stands united in demanding that they meet their obligations, and we will do what is necessary to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. At the same time, we'll engage Russia to seek further reductions in our nuclear arsenals and continue leading the global effort to secure nuclear materials that could fall into the wrong hands. Because our ability to influence others depends on our willingness to lead and meet our obligations. America must also face the rapidly growing threat from cyber attacks. Now, we know hackers steal people's identities and infiltrate private emails. We know foreign countries and companies swipe our corporate secrets. Now our enemies are also seeking the ability to sabotage our power grid, our financial institutions, our air traffic control systems. We cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security and our economy. And that's why earlier today, I signed a new executive order that will strengthen our cyber defenses by increasing information sharing and developing standards to protect our national security, our jobs, and our privacy. But now Congress must act as well by passing legislation to give our government a greater capacity to secure our networks and deter attacks. This is something we should be able to get done on a bipartisan basis. Now, even as we protect our people, we should remember that today's world presents not just dangers, not just threats, it presents opportunities to boost American exports, support American jobs, and level the playing field in the growing markets of Asia. We intend to complete negotiations on a Trans-Pacific partnership. And tonight I'm announcing that we will launch talks on a comprehensive transatlantic trade and investment partnership with the European Union, because trade that is fair and free across the Atlantic supports millions of good-paying American jobs. We also know that progress in the most impoverished parts of our world enriches us all. Not only because it creates new markets, more stable order in certain regions of the world, but also because it's the right thing to do. You know, in many places, people live on little more than $1 a day. So the United States will join with our allies to eradicate such extreme poverty in the next 2 decades by connecting more people to the global economy, by empowering women, by giving our young and brightest minds new opportunities to serve, and helping communities to feed, empower, and educate themselves, by saving the world's children from preventable deaths, and by realizing the promise of an AIDS-free generation, which is within our reach. You see, America must remain a beacon to all who seek freedom during this period of historic change. I saw the power of hope last year in Rangoon, in Burma, when Aung San Suu Kyi welcomed an American president into the home where she had been imprisoned for years. When thousands of Burmese lined the streets waving American flags, including a man who said, "There is justice and law in the United States. I want our country to be like that." In defense of freedom, we'll remain the anchor of strong alliances from the Americas to Africa, from Europe to Asia. In the Middle East, we will stand with citizens as they demand their universal rights and support stable transitions to democracy. We know the process will be messy, and we cannot presume to dictate the course of change in countries like Egypt. But we can and will insist on respect for the fundamental rights of all people. We'll keep the pressure on a Syrian regime that has murdered its own people and support opposition leaders that respect the rights of every Syrian. And we will stand steadfast with Israel in pursuit of security and a lasting peace. These are the messages I'll deliver when I travel to the Middle East next month. And all this work depends on the courage and sacrifice of those who serve in dangerous places at great personal risk. Our diplomats, our intelligence officers, and the men and women of the United States Armed Forces. As long as I'm Commander-in-Chief, we will do whatever we must to protect those who serve their country abroad, and we will maintain the best military the world has ever known. We'll invest in new capabilities, even as we reduce waste and wartime spending. We will ensure equal treatment for all service members and equal benefits for their families, gay and straight. We will draw upon the courage and skills of our sisters and daughters and moms because women have proven under fire that they are ready for combat. We will keep faith with our veterans, investing in world-class care, including mental health care, for our wounded warriors. Supporting our military families, giving our veterans the benefits and education and job opportunities that they have earned. And I want to thank my wife, Michelle, and Dr. Joe Biden for their continued dedication to serving our military families as well as they have served us. Thank you, honey. Thank you, Jill. Defending our freedom, though, is not just the job of our military alone. We must all do our part to make sure our God-given rights are protected here at home. That includes one of the most fundamental rights of a democracy, the right to vote. Well, when any American, no matter where they live or what their party, are denied that right because they can't afford to wait for 5 or 6 or 7 hours just to cast their ballot, we are betraying our ideals. So tonight I'm announcing a nonpartisan commission to improve the voting experience in America, and it definitely needs improvement. I'm asking 2 longtime experts in the field who, by the way, recently served as the top attorneys for my campaign and for Governor Romney's campaign, to lead it. We can fix this, and we will. The American people demand it, and so does our democracy. Of course, what I've said tonight matters little if we don't come together to protect our most precious resource, our children. It has been 2 months since Newtown. I know this is not the first time this country has debated how to reduce gun violence, but this time is different. Overwhelming majorities of Americans who believe in the Second Amendment, have come together around common sense reform, like background checks that will make it harder for criminals to get their hands on a gun. Senators of both parties are working together on tough new laws to prevent anyone from buying guns for resale to criminals. Police chiefs are asking our help to get weapons of war and massive ammunition magazines off our streets because these police chiefs, they're tired of seeing their guys and gals being outgunned. Each of these proposals deserves a vote in Congress. If you want to vote no, that's your choice. But these proposals deserve a vote. Because in the 2 months since Newtown, more than 1,000 birthdays, graduations, anniversaries have been stolen from our lives by a bullet from a gun. More than 1,000. One of those we lost was a young girl named Idea Pendleton. She was 15 years old. She loved fig Newtons and lip gloss. She was a majorette. She was so good to her friends, they all thought they were her best friend. Just 3 weeks ago, she was here in Washington with her classmates, performing for her country at my inauguration. And a week later, she was shot and killed in a Chicago park after school, just a mile away from my house. Idea's parents, Nate and Cleo, are in this chamber tonight, along with more than 24 Americans whose lives have been torn apart by gun violence. They deserve a vote. They deserve a vote. They deserve a vote. Gabby Giffords deserves a vote. The families of Newtown deserve a vote. The families of Aurora deserve a vote. The families of Oak Creek and Tucson and Blacksburg and the countless other communities ripped open by gun violence, they deserve a simple vote. They deserve a simple vote. Our actions will not prevent every senseless act of violence in this country. In fact, no laws, no initiatives, no administrative acts will perfectly solve all the challenges I've outlined tonight. But we were never sent here to be perfect. We were sent here to make what difference we can, to secure this nation, expand opportunity, uphold our ideals through the hard, often frustrating, but absolutely necessary work of self-government. We were sent here to look out for our fellow Americans, the same way they look out for one another, every single day, usually without fanfare, all across this country. We should follow their example. We should follow the example of a New York City nurse named Menchu Sanchez. When Hurricane Sandy plunged her hospital into darkness, she wasn't thinking about how her own home was faring. Her mind was on the 20 precious newborns in her care and the rescue plan she devised that kept them all safe. We should follow the example of a North Miami woman named Desaline Victor. When Desaline arrived at her polling place, she was told the wait to vote might be 6 hours. And as time ticked by, her concern was not with her tired body or aching feet, but whether folks like her would get to have their say. And hour after hour, a throng of people stayed in line to support her. Because Desaline is 102 years old. And they erupted in cheers when she finally put on a sticker that read, "I voted." Well, there's Desaline. We should follow the example of a police officer named Brian Murphy. When a gunman opened fire on a Sikh temple in Wisconsin, Brian was the first to arrive, and he did not consider his own safety. He fought back until help arrived and ordered his fellow officers to protect the safety of the fellow Americans worshiping inside, even as he lay bleeding from 12 bullet wounds. And when asked how he did that, Brian said, "That's just the way we're made. That's just the way we're made." We may do different jobs and wear different uniforms and hold different views than the person beside us. But as Americans, we all share the same proud title. We are citizens. It's a word that doesn't just describe our nationality or our legal status. It describes the way we're made. It describes what we believe. It captures the enduring idea that this country only works when we accept certain obligations to one another and to future generations. That our rights are wrapped up in the rights of others. And that well into our third century as a nation, it remains the task of us all, as citizens of these United States, to be the authors of the next great chapter of our American story. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless these United States of America.
So that's the State of the Union of President Barack Obama as he begins his second term in office. Spoke just about an hour, almost exactly an hour. Covered a lot of ground, as tends to happen in these speeches. Talked about job creation, deficit reduction that would include both taxes and spending cuts, spending more on infrastructure, spending more on education, although he talked about doing that in cooperation with states, climate change, minimum wage, immigration reform, gun control, and voting reform, something I'm not sure everybody expected to hear in tonight's speech. We're going to talk about all of that now, starting with Governor George Pataki, the former Republican governor of the great state of New York. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jerry. Nice being with you.
So you heard the speech. Any surprises in there for you, or any themes that will resonate?
There were some surprises. I mean, we are still with much too high unemployment, and it seems every solution is a government solution. You mentioned spending on preschool, spending on infrastructure, spending on high-tech investments, all of the things that we tried the last 4 years and don't work. And the rhetoric is perfectly fine. The rhetoric is, oh, we're going to pay for it all. But in fact, if you're a small business person looking at this, you're concerned that things like accelerated depreciation may go away, and yet you're going to have to hire people at a higher wage if you can afford to do it. So there's a tremendous difference between the hope of the words and the consequences of the policies, in my view.
Although I think that if you look behind some of those words, the actual dollar signs back there aren't that great. For example, he talked about having a manufacturing initiative that leaned on business to help do that. He talked about having public-private partnerships, something governors have tried, and mayors, to do infrastructure spending. Absolutely. Is that a sign that maybe there's a move away from just writing checks?
I think this was far less divisive and partisan than his inaugural, but I still think if you look behind the policies, the solution is always government. And yes, there are some things like public-private partnerships for infrastructure. I think that's a very good idea. But when you look at the totality of what is being proposed here, I mean, wonderful rhetoric about how raising the income of a low-income worker to $9 an hour index for inflation is going to lift them from poverty. But how many people are not going to get those jobs? How many young people are not going to have a job they could have otherwise had because of this? So I'm concerned about the deficit. I'm concerned about spending. And then the president also has this way about him. And climate change, you mentioned, is one of them, where he says we should pass a bill, but if you don't, I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. And that has always been troubling to me, that this president doesn't appear to have the respect for Congress and separation of powers that the Constitution requires.
Governor, you mentioned climate change. It did have, along with energy policy generally, a pretty big place in this speech. There's a passage of what he said on that subject I'd like to listen to. Sure. And then have you react to.
Sure.
We can choose to believe that Superstorm Sandy and the most severe drought in decades and the worst wildfires some states have ever seen were all just a freak coincidence. Or we can choose to believe in the overwhelming judgment of science and act before it's too late.
So he talked about a market-based solution to climate change. Is there such a thing? And you think that there's a path ahead that's a bipartisan path?
I think there are market-based solutions that work to an extent. And he mentioned one that I totally agree with, and that is energy efficiency. Doubling our energy efficiency by 2030. I think that's very doable, and the economic return to the private sector and to those who make those investments works. But I fear that what he was talking about here is imposing some sort of an energy tax that he would then use to fund government investment. We saw it with Solyndra. We saw it with A123, a battery company. The government should not be picking technologies or winners or losers, and certainly not imposing an additional cost on our businesses or our consumers.
He did talk about, in a way, although he did use this term, achieving something close to energy independence in this country, and talked about an all-of-the-above approach to doing that. Do you think he's serious about that?
I do. I think that's one where I'll give him credit for the goal, and I think it's achievable. But I think it's largely achievable because of private sector technological innovation, like fracking. And the government has been an impediment, like blocking the Keystone Pipeline, where we could have domestic Canadian sources of oil to replace Hugo Chavez's Venezuelan oil. So yes, I think that goal is achievable. I think the president's serious about it. But I do think it would be far easier if we did more to empower technology in the private sector than having government provide the lead.
You know, you're in a state that has had a very active debate on another topic that was a big portion of the speech tonight, gun control. Is there a bipartisan path forward on gun control nationally?
I do think there is. I think there's a bipartisan general consensus, for example, on background checks at gun shows. I think it makes perfectly good sense, and it's not ideological, that states should be required not to allow a convicted felon or someone who is mentally ill to take advantage of that loophole. I think there are certain elements where a bipartisan consensus can be achieved if the goal is in fact to achieve a law as opposed to making a political statement.
You know, none of us a few months ago would have suspected we'd be talking as much about gun control in this speech as we probably will in its aftermath. It was interesting in the chamber tonight. You had a lot of members wearing ribbons for Sandy Hook Elementary students, among others. The president basically said, at least I want a vote on everything. Do you think Republicans will give him a vote on the measures that he talked about tonight?
I can't speak for the Republican leadership in Congress, but I do think they have a good faith intention of passing important legislation, including some gun legislation, including immigration reform, including some of the other areas the president talked about. A lot of it is that the president is very effective, and when something doesn't happen, it's always the Republicans' fault. Well, if you look at the details, very often it's his unwillingness to compromise to get 80% as opposed to 100% that creates that impact.
Well, let's talk about one of those areas where there might have to be some compromise: immigration reform. There's a lot of consensus forming here, but there are also some fissures opening up. Which is more important in your mind right now, the areas where there seems to be a consensus or those dividing lines that still remain?
Well, I think the dividing lines decide whether or not you actually get a law.
Right.
I think there is a growing consensus on the major issues. One of the two important questions that are still out there is how can we be confident we have control over the border? Right. And I think that has to be a condition precedent to actually creating this path to citizenship. And I think that is something that could be a bone of contention. And the second is, the president mentioned, we don't want them to leapfrog ahead of those who are waiting to get here legally. I think there's broad agreement on that. The question is, how do you structure it in such a way that you don't reward those who have broken the law?
Another topic that occupied a lot of the first half of the speech was manufacturing in America. An attempt by the president to say we can have essentially a renaissance in manufacturing. You know, you governed a state where the fate of manufacturing was always a big issue. Is the trend line moving in the right direction?
Absolutely,
there?
And I think we have a tremendous opportunity in manufacturing for a number of reasons, most of which do not relate to Washington. One is the decline in energy costs. That is having a profound impact in lowering one of the major costs that manufacturing faces in this country. The second is the fact that countries like China and others are becoming more expensive, and that makes us more competitive. We've always had the best workforce. We've always had the risk capital and the investment capital, but the single greatest impediment is the fact that the corporate tax rate is the highest in the developed world. We have $2 trillion overseas from companies that have built things there, made money there, and can't bring it back because they will be penalized by a punitive, really, corporate tax rate. If we lowered that tax rate, we would see manufacturing grow much quicker.
Did you hear anything from the president tonight, though, that made you think there's going to be progress on that front?
No, the president never mentioned that.
Well, he called for tax reform.
Tax reform, but what he said is close loopholes. And I think you need to look at the fact that we have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world and the impediment that is to bringing capital back to the United States and creating investment in things like manufacturing. The president didn't mention it, and that to me is trouble.
But if there's a broader tax reform, corporate tax reform could become part of it. That's got to be a bipartisan effort. Is there a prospect for that in the next year?
Yes, I think that is a very real possibility. My fear is that this president, as we saw when he just threw out his own bipartisan deficit reduction commission, that had tax reform and lowered the rates, both the marginal rate for individuals and for corporations. He rejected that. So I fear that his idea of tax reform is getting rid of certain breaks for companies that may or may not be beneficial, but using it to fund new government programs.
Governor George Pataki, it's an ambitious agenda. We'll see how much of it happens in the next few months and in the next 4 years. Thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. Good being with you.
Thanks. We are awaiting a Republican response to the president's State of the Union address. That Republican response is going to come from Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, a Republican who's been heavily identified with the effort in his party to come up with a solution to the immigration question that was discussed at some length by President Obama in his address tonight. I think we'll also be hearing a little bit from him about some of the issues the president raised on the economic side. The idea of having a deficit reduction plan that includes both taxes and spending cuts. I think the Republicans have a different view of that. It'll be interesting to see what Marco Rubio has to say on that front. You know, there's another element of the speech that I wanted to talk about briefly before we go to Senator Rubio, which is the foreign policy component, which actually occupied about a third of the speech in the latter half. John Bussey's back with us. Thanks, John. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of those, the foreign policy elements of the speech. I think the most striking one was the president's discussion of a faster withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan than had previously thought. He's talking about 34,000 out of 60,000 will be home in a year. Seemed to get applause in the chamber. I don't know how many Republicans were applauding, but I suspect in the country at large, that's a reasonably popular way to approach things.
Yeah, that's right. And he went further, didn't he? He said the war is going to be over by the end of next year. This is going to be contrary to a lot of people in his own administration, including Joe Biden, who is kind of concerned about how many troops get left over, the pace of withdrawal. And we still don't really know exactly how many will be left over. In other words, the war may be over, but there's going to be an American presence in Afghanistan for quite some time.
Right. And he talked about something that's very important in that, which is having an agreement with the Afghan government that helps determine what those Americans who are left are going to do. That's not really been decided yet.
That's right. And this is the whole issue of immunity from Afghan law for those soldiers in Afghanistan. There's a great deal still to be resolved, and we saw with Iraq how difficult that is to do. That's why we have no presence there now. You know what struck me interesting on the foreign policy front, the president's comments, was this affirmation for a free trade agreement between the United States and Europe. Now, this has kind of been bubbling along, but for the president to use the State of the Union to kind of launch this initiative with Europe and to affirm again his commitment to a trans-Pacific trading partnership with many Pacific Rim countries, exclusive of China, is really quite remarkable, because on the foreign policy front, that might be the most lasting economic, political issue for the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting for a Democratic president to push free trade that hard in a speech like this. Yes. It's not been easy for somebody in his party to do that.
That's right. And this is not going to be easy with Europe either. It's calling for harmonizing regulatory rules with Europe, getting past a variety of trade barriers that exist. Europe sees them in the U.S. as well. But it very much is in harmony with his economic argument, isn't it? It's job creation, trade begets more jobs.
But, you know, there's always been a question about this European free trade agreement idea since it's been bubbling along, as you said, for the last few months, which is that designed to help the U.S. or Europe? Because many people see it as a way to help finally pull the EU, the European Union zone, out of the economic ditch. Is it beneficial for the U.S. as well?
Oh, I think so, definitely. And at a minimum, in harmonizing regulatory issues with Europe. I mean, we saw this recently with the emissions control, didn't we? On aircraft flying into Europe having to abide by European emissions. The lack of sync on everything from emissions of airplanes to privacy rules inhibits trade and inhibits investment. And I think that the U.S. sees, big opportunities there.
Let me return finally to one subject you and I talked about before the speech started, which was your thoughts about what the business community might be looking for, might want to hear, might react to in this speech. What did you hear? What did you not hear that's important on that front?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the business community really got much in this instance. They may have agreed most with the president affirming the fact that brinksmanship in Washington gets in the way of investment and stresses out the consumer, is the wording he used. And we saw that in the fourth quarter of last year, didn't we? Where there was a short contraction as a result of this brinksmanship. I'm not sure that there was a lot there. There was a discussion. There was a kind of pleasant reflection on energy costs, but not a commitment to opening up federal lands to fracking.
So here's Marco Rubio with the Republican response.
On the start of his second term. Tonight, I have the honor of responding to a State of the Union address on behalf of my fellow Republicans. And I'm especially honored to be addressing our brave men and women serving in the armed forces and in diplomatic posts around the world. You may be thousands of miles away, but you are always in our prayers. The State of the Union address is always a reminder of how unique America is. You see, for much of human history, most people were trapped in stagnant societies where a tiny minority always stayed on top and no one else even had a chance. But America is exceptional because we believe that every life at every stage is precious and that everyone everywhere has a God-given right to go as far as their talents and hard work will take them. Like most Americans, for me, this ideal is personal. My parents immigrated here in pursuit of the opportunity to improve their life and to give their children the chance at an even better one. They made it to the middle class, my dad working as a bartender and my mother as a cashier and a maid. I didn't inherit any money from them, but I inherited something far better, the real opportunity to accomplish my dreams. This opportunity to make it to the middle class or beyond, no matter where you start out in life, it isn't bestowed on us from Washington. It comes from a vibrant, free economy where people can risk their own money to open a business. And when they succeed, they hire more people who in turn invest or spend their money they make helping others start a business and create jobs. Presidents in both parties, from John F. Kennedy to Ronald Reagan, have known that our free enterprise economy is the source of our middle-class prosperity. But President Obama, he believes it's the cause of our problems. That the economic downturn happened because our government didn't tax enough, spend enough, or control enough. And therefore, as you heard tonight, his solution to virtually every problem we face is for Washington to tax more, borrow more, and spend more. This idea that our problems were caused by a government that was too small, it's just not true. In fact, a major cause of our recent downturn was a housing crisis created by reckless government policies. And the idea that more taxes and more government spending is the best way to help hardworking middle-class taxpayers, that's an old idea that's failed every time it's been tried. More government isn't going to help you get ahead. It's going to hold you back. More government isn't going to create more opportunities. It's going to limit them. And more government isn't going to inspire new ideas, new businesses, and new private sector jobs. It's going to create uncertainty. Because more government breeds complicated rules and laws that small businesses can't afford to follow. Because more government raises taxes on employers who then pass the costs on to their employees through fewer hours, lower pay, and even layoffs. And because many government programs that claim to help the middle class often end up hurting them. For example, Obamacare. It was supposed to help middle-class Americans afford health insurance. But now some people are losing the health insurance they were happy with. And because Obamacare created expensive requirements for companies with more than 50 employees, now many of these companies aren't hiring. Not only that, they're being forced to lay people off and switch from full-time employees to part-time workers. Now, does this mean that there's no role for government? Of course not. It plays a crucial part in keeping us safe, enforcing rules, and providing some security against the risks of modern life. But government's role is wisely limited by the Constitution. And it can't play its essential role when it ignores those limits. There are valid reasons to be concerned about the president's plan to grow our government. But anytime anyone opposes the president's agenda, he and his allies usually respond by falsely attacking their motives. When we point out that no matter how many job-killing laws we pass, our government can't control the weather, he accuses us of wanting dirty water and dirty air. When we suggest we strengthen our safety net programs by giving states more flexibility to manage them, he accuses us of wanting to leave the elderly and the disabled to fend for themselves. And tonight, he even criticized us for refusing to raise taxes to delay military cuts, cuts that were his idea in the first place. But his favorite attack of all is that those of us who don't agree with him, that we only care about rich people. Mr. President, I still live in the same working-class neighborhood I grew up in. My neighbors aren't millionaires. They're retirees who depend on Social Security and Medicare. They're workers who have to get up early tomorrow morning and go to work to pay the bills. They're immigrants who came here because they were stuck in poverty in the countries where the government dominated the economy. The tax increases and the deficit spending you propose will hurt middle-class families. It will cost them their raises. It will cost them their benefits. It may even cost some of them their jobs. And it will hurt seniors because it does nothing to save Medicare and Social Security. So, Mr. President, I don't oppose your plans because I want to protect the rich. I oppose your plans because I want to protect my neighbors. Hardworking, middle-class Americans who don't need us to come up with a plan to grow the government. They need a plan to grow the middle class. Economic growth is the best way to help the middle class. Unfortunately, our economy actually shrank during the last 3 months of 2012. But if we can get the economy to grow at just 4% a year, it would create middle-class jobs, and it would reduce our deficits by almost $4 trillion over the next decade. Tax increases can't do this. Raising taxes won't create private sector jobs, and there's no realistic tax increase that could lower our deficits by almost $4 trillion. That's why I hope the President will abandon his obsession with raising taxes and instead work with us to achieve real growth in our economy. One of the best ways to encourage growth is through our energy industry. Of course, solar and wind energy should be a part of our energy portfolio. But God also blessed us with America with abundant coal, oil, and natural gas. Instead of wasting more taxpayer money on so-called clean energy companies like Solyndra, let's open up more federal lands for safe and responsible exploration. And let's reform our energy regulations so that they're reasonable and based on common sense. If we can grow our energy industry, it will make us energy independent. It will create middle-class jobs, and it will help bring manufacturing back from places like China. Simplifying our tax code will also help the middle class because it will make it easier for small businesses to hire and grow. And we agree with the President. We should lower our corporate tax rate, which is one of the highest in the world, so that companies will start bringing their money and their jobs back here from overseas. We can also help grow our economy if we have a legal immigration system that allows us to attract and assimilate the world's best and brightest. We need a responsible, permanent solution to the problem of those who are here illegally. But first, we must follow through on the broken promises of the past to secure our borders and enforce our laws. Helping the middle class grow will also require an education system that gives people the skills today's jobs entail and the knowledge that tomorrow's world will require. We need to incentivize local school districts to offer more advanced placement courses and more vocational and career training. And we need to give all parents, especially the parents of children with special needs, the opportunity to send their children to the school of their choice. And because college tuition costs have grown so fast, we need to change the way we pay for higher education. Now, I believe in federal financial aid. I couldn't have gone to college without it. But it's not just about spending more money. It's also about strengthening and modernizing them. The 21st century workforce should not be forced to accept 20th century education solutions. Today's students aren't only 18-year-olds. They're returning veterans. They're single parents who decide to get the education they need to earn a decent wage. And they're workers who have lost jobs that are never coming back and need to be retrained. We need student aid that does not discriminate against programs that non-traditional students rely on, like online courses or degree programs that give you credit for work experience. When I finished school, I owed over $100,000 in student loans, a debt I paid off just a few months ago. Today, many graduates face massive student loans. We must give students more information on the costs and benefits of the student loans they're taking out. All of these measures are key to helping grow the economy. Though we won't be able to sustain a vibrant middle class unless we solve our debt problem. Every dollar our government borrows is money that isn't being invested to create jobs. And the uncertainty created by the debt is one reason why many businesses aren't hiring. The President loves to blame the debt on President Bush, but President Obama has created more debt in 4 years than his predecessor did in 8. The real cause of our debt is that our government has been spending $1 trillion more than it takes in every year. That's why we need a balanced budget amendment. The biggest obstacle to balancing the budget are programs where spending is already locked in. One of these programs is Medicare. It's especially important to me. It provided my father the care he needed to battle cancer and ultimately to die with dignity. And it pays for the care my mother receives right now. I would never support any changes to Medicare that would hurt seniors like my mother. But anyone who's in favor of leaving Medicare exactly the way it is right now is in favor of bankrupting it. Republicans have offered a detailed and credible plan that helps save Medicare without hurting today's retirees. Instead of playing politics with Medicare, when is the President going to offer his detailed plan to save it? Tonight would have been a good time for him to do it. Of course, we face other challenges as well. We were all heartbroken by the recent tragedy in Connecticut. We must effectively deal with the rise of violence in our country. But unconstitutionally undermining the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans is not the way to do it. On foreign policy, America continues to be indispensable to the goal of global liberty, property, and safeguarding human rights. The world is a better place when America is the strongest nation on earth. But we can't remain powerful if we don't have an economy that can afford it. In the short time that I've been here in Washington, nothing has frustrated me more than false choices like the one the President laid out tonight. The choice isn't just between big government or big business. What we need is an accountable, efficient, and effective government that allows small and new businesses to create more middle-class jobs. We don't have to raise taxes to avoid the President's devastating cuts to our military. Republicans have passed a plan that replaces these cuts with responsible spending reforms. In order to balance our budget, the choice doesn't have to be either higher taxes or dramatic benefit cuts for those in need. Instead, we should grow our economy so that we can create new taxpayers, not new taxes, and so our government can afford to help those who truly cannot help themselves. And the truth is, every problem can't be solved by the government. Many are caused by the moral breakdown in our society. And the answer to these challenges lie primarily in our families and our faiths, not our politicians. Despite our differences, I know that both Republicans and Democrats love America. I pray we can come together to solve our problems, because the choices before us could not be more important. If we can get our economy healthy again, our children will be the most prosperous Americans ever. And if we do not, we will forever be known as the generation responsible for America's decline. At a time when one showdown after another ends in short-term deals that do little or nothing about our real problems, some are starting to believe that our government leaders just can't or won't make the right choices anymore. But our strength has never come from the White House or the Capitol. It's always come from our people. A people united by the American idea that if you have a dream and you're willing to work hard, nothing should be impossible. Americans have always celebrated and been inspired by those who succeed. But it's the dreams of those who are still trying to make it that sets our nation apart. Tonight, all across this land, parents will hold their newborn children in their arms for the first time. For many of these parents, life has not gone the way they had planned. Maybe they were born into circumstances they've found difficult to escape. Maybe they've made some mistakes along the way. Maybe their young mother's all alone, the father of their child long gone. But tonight, when they look into the eyes of their child for the first time, their lives will change forever. Because in those eyes, they will see what my parents saw in me and what your parents saw in you. They will see all the hopes and dreams they once had for themselves. This dream of a better life for their children, it's the hope of parents everywhere. Politicians here and throughout the world have long promised that more government can make those dreams come true. But we Americans have always known better. From our earliest days, we embraced economic liberty. And because we did, America remains one of the few places on earth where dreams like these even have a chance. Each time our nation has faced great challenges, what has kept us together was our shared hope for a better life. Now, let that hope bring us together again to solve the challenges of our time and write the next chapter in the amazing story of the greatest nation man has ever known. Thank you for listening. May God bless all of you. May God bless our president, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
So that was Marco Rubio, a Republican senator from Florida, giving the Republican response to the President's State of the Union. In many ways, I think he laid out what he described as a stark choice on economic policy in particular. Talked about the President's desire to use tax increases as part of a formula for continuing to attack the deficit, said that won't work, said it's a formula for actually hampering the middle class, that deficit reduction has to come in other ways, principally through economic growth. I think in some other areas he tried to narrow the distance between Republicans and Democrats, particularly on immigration reform, a subject that he's worked on heavily. To talk about the speech and the response to the speech a little bit further, we're going to be returning to Rick Shankman, a presidential historian who joins us from Seattle. Oh, I think before that happens, we're going to talk to Laura Tyson, who is director of the White House Council of Economic Advisors in the Clinton White House. Laura, I think you're joining us by phone.
Yes, I am.
Hey, thanks for coming. Let me ask you to respond to the response, first of all. Senator Rubio tried to lay out what he said was a pretty stark choice of economic policy. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction was I listened carefully to his remarks. He was commenting on a speech that the president did not make. The president was not proposing major new spending programs. He was very clear to say that every initiative he proposed was actually not going to increase spending, and he also proposed at the very beginning working with the Congress on some reforms in Medicare to achieve the kind of savings that the Simpson-Bowles Commission had proposed. He proposed tax reform, comprehensive tax reform, which was also something that the Simpson-Bowles Commission proposed as a way both to reform the system and raise revenue. So I really felt that the response was painting a picture of a caricature of big spending presidents who like to spend a lot of money, and this was just not what President Obama was talking about. It would have been better to have a response that was a response to the actual speech.
You know, perhaps it's an example of the conversation continuing to be one of people talking past each other in Washington, which I've seen plenty of in the last few years. Did you hear anything tonight that suggests maybe that's shifted?
Well, I think that there are certain issues where things do seem to be shifting, and I think that clearly if you even looked at the audience responses, you can see that in the area of immigration, things have shifted, and I think that we will see, you know, I served on President Obama's Jobs Council, and one of the major issues that the business leaders talked about was immigration reform. That was a major issue for them. They also talked about spending more on infrastructures. Again, there's bipartisan support for this, so maybe we can move in that direction. So I think there were some parts of the speech that I think reflect the fact that people are coming together around certain issues.
You know, I wonder, Laura, if you think there's a way to have a path toward both economic growth and deficit reduction. Those two things work against each other sometimes. The president said something interesting tonight. He said, you know, deficit reduction alone is not an economic plan. Is the balance right in Washington right now between those two things?
Well, I think that, look, deficit reduction is helpful to economic growth depending upon the economic circumstances of the economy. Senator Rubio pointed out that the economy contracted in the fourth quarter, and he implied that that was because of high government spending. Actually, the contraction was because there were very dramatic cuts in defense spending. Right now, as the president warned, if we go through these harsh, arbitrary, large cuts to achieve an arbitrary amount of deficit reduction, right now the economy will lose jobs and its growth will slow down. Over time, as the president said, we need additional deficit reduction, and actually he and Senator Rubio chose the same total number, $4 trillion, but the president noted we've already done about 60% of that. There's work that has already been done by the Congress with the president, but the sequester is really bad policy right now. It would actually undermine growth. Now, longer term, the kinds of things the president was talking about where you adjust what the government spends money on. So spend money on infrastructure because we know that enhances private sector productivity. Spend money on education because we know that leads to productive workforces and makes the U.S. an attractive place to do business. So I think the emphasis here has to be on what are the elements of deficit reduction and how fast do you do it?
Laura Tyson, former chairwoman of the Council of Economic Advisors, thank you for joining us from the West Coast. I think now we're going to be joined by Reince Priebus, the Republican National Committee chairman, who's with us from Washington. Reince, thanks for joining us. Plenty for you to chew on in a State of the Union speech and the response from your own party. I have some specifics I want to ask you about, but let me just ask you for a general reaction first. I mean, Laura Tyson just said the president did not give a big government speech tonight. Marco Rubio seemed to have a different idea. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same old thing with this president. I mean, he can give a pretty decent speech, but unfortunately, it's all just a bunch of talk. And so, I think it's imperative for our party to continue offering solutions to these problems. And that, we know the president's going to get up there. He's going to give the same speech, the same issues, the same call for action, except when it comes for the president to actually follow through on some of these proposals that we've presented in his own recommendations from his own people. Jerry, he just hasn't done it. I mean, you look at this, I'm not sure if you saw the video we put out already after the speech, but it gets into the fact that for years he's been talking about the fact that none of his proposals will raise a single dime toward adding to the deficit. And he does that time after time after time, proposal after proposal, year after year. The fact is he's added not just one dime to our deficit, he's added over 58 trillion dimes, Jerry, to our deficit. The issue for us as a party, though, has to be offering solutions. Paul Ryan's going to take this charge now. We're going to have this great debate over spending. We're going to offer a budget, and it's up to the president and his leadership and his party to work with Paul Ryan, come up with a budget that can actually get our deficits and our debt window under control, try to secure the future in regard to Medicare and Social Security, and do some adult things in Washington. We want to do that. The problem is that while the president's a pretty good campaigner, he can give a speech, he just hasn't been able to follow through on this stuff. And that's the real downside to what we're facing here in Washington.
So, Reince, let me ask you one quick final question. One of the big initiatives in the president's speech tonight was a proposal to raise the minimum wage to $9. Is anybody on your side of the aisle going to be in favor of that?
Well, I mean, why stop at 9? I mean, why not go to 15? I mean, if the solution to our problems is just to raise the minimum wage, make sure everyone just makes more money, and it doesn't really cause any problems with employment, right? It's not a big deal. Just raise the minimum wage to more money. I mean, why stop at $9? If this is something that's going to help us create a whole lot of higher paying jobs and people are going to be better off, then we ought to just mandate a minimum wage higher than $9 an hour. My goodness, I think people should be making a lot more than that. So why don't we just keep on moving forward?
So, Reince, I'll take that as a no.
Of course, I'm being rhetorical, Jerry. I mean,
I know.
It's a job killer. We all know what it does. It's arbitrary, and these are not jobs that are intended to be long sustaining $9 an hour jobs. These are many levels, entry level jobs. And mandating this from a federal level is only going to cost jobs and hurt the economy.
Reince Priebus, Republican National Chairman, appreciate you taking some time for a reaction tonight from Washington. We'll be back after a short break with a little more post-speech analysis, including an appearance by our old friend Alan Murray. We'll be right back. We're back at WSJ.com with analysis of the President's State of the Union speech this evening, and we're going to continue the conversation by returning to somebody we spoke with before the speech for a little reaction to that speech, Rick Schenkman, who's a presidential historian, joining us from Seattle. Rick, thanks for hanging in there with us tonight. Let me just ask you generally, you heard the speech. Did you hear anything that surprised you or that you thought was extraordinary about it?
Well, let me just say that the overwhelming impression I had was that it's distressing that presidents now see fit to do State of the Union addresses like TV shows. And unfortunately, it was a relatively boring TV show. So it was disappointing. There was none of the high-flown rhetoric of a Kennedy State of the Union address or Franklin Roosevelt. There was no doctrine that was enunciated that the country could really chew on. There's no Monroe Doctrine. There was no new freedoms. There was no 4 points from Harry Truman. So overall, it just leaves me as a historian disappointed. The emotional high point, of course, came at the end when he had all those Americans that he was seizing on and saying, you know, he had a 102-year-old woman there. Wonderful stuff. Great TV, but forgettable. Historians won't really be writing about it. It'll get maybe one sentence. So that's my overall reaction. I'll say politically, just to do some political analysis. So I think the most important thing that he said in that address, I don't think anybody else will think so, but I'm going to throw this out, is when he talked about how if he gets a vote, he'll consider that a victory. He wants a vote. The reason why this is so critical is John Boehner has got to be willing to put his legislation, Obama's legislation, up for a vote. If he does, then a lot of that legislation is actually going to pass because he'll be able to get some Republican votes and he'll have Democratic votes, of course. Yeah. And that's the key politically to his success in this second term, at least for the next 2 years.
And that may be,
so
that may be the new normal in Washington, Rick.
Yeah, so if he can get put enough pressure on Boehner to allow legislation to come to a vote, then I think he's going to have some successes over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Rick, hold on just 1 second. We're going to pull into the conversation our former colleague here at the Wall Street Journal, Alan Murray, who's with us from Washington, where he is now the president of the Pew Research Center. Alan, thanks for coming back to your old haunt.
Happy to be here, Jerry.
You know, Alan, you at Pew have done some really interesting research on where the Republic is. Leave aside the politicians. Where's the public right now, and where are the public's priorities? When you look at the list of priorities that you've seen in your research that the public cites, how did the president do tonight in matching his speech up with what the public wants to hear about?
Well, look, what all our research shows is that the top of the public's list is fixing the economy, creating jobs, dealing with the deficit, dealing with Medicare, dealing with Social Security. Those things all get over 50%. A lot of the other things like immigration, guns, climate change are well below 50%. He obviously talked about the economy. He talked about creating jobs. But, Jerry, you know better than I do that we're dealing with a dysfunctional Washington right now. I didn't hear anything tonight from the president or from Senator Rubio that suggests that they figured out a way around that dysfunction that is going to let them take on the big fiscal issues that are at the center of the economic conundrum. So I didn't hear anything tonight that will change that. The one thing, as many of your previous speakers have said, where you do see some general bipartisan movement is on immigration. That's great. Immigration seems to be the one area where he can make some progress.
Well, in fact, I think the president essentially said that on some of these things, the way to move ahead is to move around Congress, and that was pretty frank in a couple of spots. Particularly on climate change.
But of course, as you know, when you're talking about deficits the size we have, when you're talking about the explosion in entitlement costs that's coming down the pike, you can't do it without getting agreement with Congress at some point.
You know, I wonder, though, Alan, if you would agree with me that if you look at the list of priorities that you just spoke about, and you look at this speech, that at least the president was closer to the mark on addressing what concerns Americans most now than he was in the inaugural address.
Absolutely. I think it was very different than the inaugural address. The inaugural address was more of a polarizing speech. This one seemed to hit on all the important issues, went right down the line in touching on them. In that sense, I think he was hitting on the concerns of the American people.
You know, let me ask you about one in particular, Alan, climate change. I'm wondering whether you have the sense that this is not an issue that yet seizes American voters, broadly speaking, or are we missing the mark there?
No, we polled 21 issues, asked people to rank 21 issues. And of those 21 issues, climate change came in dead last. This is not something that has grabbed the imagination of the American people. It may be important. It may be the future of the planet. It has not yet been sold to the American people. Now, the president may have an opportunity to make some progress on there, not by negotiating with Congress, but doing some things on the regulatory front. That's not, I don't think anyone thinks that's the most efficient way to do it or even the most effective way to do it, but that may be what he has in mind.
But Alan, I don't think efficient or effective are words that are applied to Washington much these days, so that may be the best
I think you're right.
Thank you so much for coming back. It's great to see you.
Good to
we'll
be
stay
here.
in touch. Thanks very much. And that concludes our coverage of President Obama's State of the Union address. Thanks for joining us. We'll close by giving you a few of the highlights of that hour-long address. Thanks.
The President of the United States.
It is our generation's task, then, to reignite the true engine of America's economic growth, a rising, thriving middle class. Nothing I'm proposing tonight should increase our deficit by a single dime. Now is not the time to gut these job-creating investments in science and innovation. Now is the time to reach a level of research and development not seen since the height of the space race. We need to make those investments. The greatest nation on earth cannot keep conducting its business by drifting from one manufactured crisis to the next. Tonight, I propose a Fix-It-First program to put people to work as soon as possible on our most urgent repairs, like the nearly 70,000 structurally deficient bridges across the country. The time has come to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to get it done. Tonight, I can announce that over the next year, another 34,000 American troops will come home from Afghanistan. This drawdown will continue, and by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over. Gabby Giffords deserves a vote. The families of Newtown deserve a vote. The families of Aurora deserve a vote. The families of Oak Creek and Tucson and Blacksburg and the countless other communities ripped open by gun violence, they deserve a simple vote. It remains the task of us all, as citizens of these United States, to be the authors of the next great chapter of our American story. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless these United States of America.